What do the World Cup and the SpaceX IPO have in common? Well, in addition to being the biggest in the world, they both kicked off this week. At a value of $1.75 trillion, SpaceX became the biggest company in history at the time of its IPO. But even more important is what it implies for space lovers as space becomes the new frontier in economic opportunity. Now, if you stacked $1.75 trillion in $1 bills, you'd have a pile of cash reaching halfway to the moon. Lay those same bills end to end, and they'd stretch nearly twice the distance from here to the sun. If that doesn't paint a clear enough picture, know that the SpaceX IPO could also make one man, Elon Musk, the first trillionaire in history of the universe. The sum is, in a word, astronomical. But will we look back on this historic milestone and say that was the day the space economy earned its place, the biggest commercial opportunity in history? Or will we say it was the peak of a hype bubble, practically bursting at the seams? Well, to begin to answer that, let's first set one thing straight. When I say the space economy, what do you picture? A couple of astronauts doing experiments in the International Space Station, maybe the James Webb Telescope snapping photos of distant galaxies. And if that's all that the space economy is, then how on earth is it worth trillions? Well, we haven't put a human back on the moon in more than 50 years. For decades, space exploration felt like a museum exhibit collecting dust, something for astronauts and engineers, but not for the rest of us. So, is the space economy even real? Or is SpaceX just peddling science fiction? Well, while most people weren't looking, space quietly stopped being about flags and photos, and it quickly turned into a heated race to build infrastructure. What does SpaceX actually do? Most people would probably respond with one word: rockets. And most people would be mostly wrong. Today, SpaceX is really three businesses packaged as one: space, connectivity, and AI. And here's the twist: in 2025, SpaceX is arguably less of a rocket company than it is a satellite internet company. The satellite internet business is Starlink, and it's the quiet monster of the SpaceX story. Its revenue nearly tripled from about $4 billion to $11.4 billion in just 3 years. And unlike the rest of SpaceX, it's profitable, generating roughly $7.2 billion in adjusted earnings last year. Now, Starlink has 10.3 million customers, up from just 2.3 million 2 years ago, and more than 9,600 satellites in orbit. About three-quarters of every working, maneuverable satellite up there belongs to SpaceX, and they're launching about 100 more every single week. And then SpaceX has its rockets. 80% of all the mass humanity has put into orbit. 80%, around 650 launches total. And last year, 95% of their missions flew on reusable boosters. That's the differentiator that allows SpaceX launches to scale like no other companies. On top of that, SpaceX Dragon capsule has flown 78 astronauts, making it the backbone of American human spaceflight this decade. But the story doesn't end there. SpaceX owns the entire chain of operations. They build the rocket, build the satellite, launch it on their own rocket, run the network, which communicates with its own lasers, and then they sell you the service. No other company on Earth does all of that. This is why, to understand its valuation, you have to use a little imagination and think as much about what it might do one day as what it does today. Investors have seen before that you can't always value a company by where it begins. Uber started as a black car app, and if that was all that they had been, you probably wouldn't know them today. But they went on to eat the taxi market, then went after food delivery. Similarly, Amazon initially just sold books, but soon after that, they sold everything, and then they became the logistics and cloud backbone of the entire internet. In fact, their satellites today compete directly with SpaceX's Starlink. So, if you'd valued either one of them on what they did on day one, you'd have missed the bigger picture. SpaceX is valued at nearly $2 trillion because investors are betting it's that kind of company, a machine that keeps using one advantage to expand into new businesses. So, this brings us to the third and weirdest pillar of the business: AI. SpaceX is increasingly tangled up with Musk's AI ambitions, and it has real contracts here. A reported Google Cloud deal closed recently was worth around $920 million a month. tied to roughly 110,000 NVIDIA chips. Plus, they also have an Anthropic arrangement involving hundreds of thousands more. But the AI business actually lost about $1.2 billion last year. Now, there's also ambitions of putting AI data centers in orbit, but that has never been attempted at scale, so that piece remains speculative for now. Bring it together, SpaceX has layers. Rockets are the credibility engine, proof that they can do impossible things. Starlink is the cash flow story, the part that pays the bills today. And then there's optionality. Mars, point to point travel across the planet, lunar infrastructure, floating orbital data centers, the stuff that's hard to price because it hasn't happened yet and maybe it never will, but it might. And that's the X factor in SpaceX. Now, there's two things that make these possibilities more than just fantasy. The first is Starship. If it works as designed, fully reusable, sending 100-ton payloads to orbit in its current version and targeting 200 tons in the next iteration, then giant satellite constellations, cargo to the moon, even data centers in space stop looking like fantasy and they start looking more like logistical challenges. Every infrastructure revolution, railroads, electricity, the internet, they looked wildly overpriced right up until the businesses that nobody had predicted started showing up. Then, all of these are connected through the second key factor, Elon, whose companies seem to hold the critical ingredients for success across the entire stack: launch, satellites, ground stations, solar, and the dish on your roof. You can squint and see where this goes. His Optimus robots as the construction crew for Mars, millions of Tesla cars feeding real world data to train his AIs, and maybe even acting as distributed computers on the road. Now, that part is speculative, but it's been teased, and it's exactly the kind of consolidation that makes investors dare to dream. So, my honest summary: Starlink pays the bills, Starship is the moat, and AI, the moon, Mars, they're lottery tickets. The bull case is that you're buying a company that turns cheap access to space into a repeatable model for conquering one new market after another. The counterpoint: SpaceX is unprofitable overall today, and that's projected to get worse before it gets better. So the question really comes down to how much do you believe? So, what do investors think of SpaceX? Well, that depends on who you ask. But before we dig into that part, please note that nothing in this video is intended to be investment advice. You should conduct your own analysis before making investment decisions or consult with a registered financial advisor. Now, I am a Tesla shareholder and I have no direct ownership in SpaceX at this time, but I may in the future. Now, let's consider both sides here and what's unique about this deal. SpaceX is only selling off a small fraction of the company in this IPO, about 4%. But to put the figures in context, when Facebook went public, it raised about $16 billion at a $104 billion valuation. So, to be clear, this deal is still an order of magnitude bigger than what is typical. So, what would the bears point to? Well, SpaceX lost about $4.9 billion last year and another $4.3 billion in just the first quarter of this year. And capital spending sits at around $20 billion a year. So this company is a capital furnace. On top of that, some of the most important technologies that the Optimus projections depend on are still very much unproven, such as Starship's in-orbit refueling or the ability to successfully put data centers in orbit. Beyond that, there's the eye-catching valuation, $1.75 trillion dollars on under $19 billion in revenue, works out to roughly 90 to 110 times sales, when most giant companies, by contrast, have values in the single digits. To be clear, SpaceX is an outlier on that multiple. It may be a great company, but when purchasing stocks, the more important question is often whether you're getting it at the right price. Some Wall Street analysts have certainly argued that SpaceX is worth significantly less than its IPO price. But then again, thus far, betting against Elon has been one of the worst trades of the last 15 years. Tesla went public in 2010 at $17 a share, and it closed that first day at $23.89. So it was up more than 40%. These are different times, and it's a different company. What we can likely expect is volatility. Only about 4% of the company is actually for sale. the float is tiny, and Musk himself is locked up from selling for 366 days. So, tiny supply plus enormous demand could theoretically push prices up early on, like Tesla, but it's far from guaranteed. And a thin float can swing in either direction. So, future dates, for example, may matter more than day one. Months from now, when lockups start to expire and insiders can finally sell, we may see big swings come around. And when we zoom out, this story is bigger than just one stock. NASDAQ reportedly tweaked its rules so SpaceX could join the NASDAQ 100 quickly, which means there will be forced buyers and holders of passive index funds. Pension funds, for example, may hold NASDAQ's QQQ, which will hold SpaceX. So, whether you like the valuation or not, you may soon find yourself owning a piece of SpaceX in your investment or retirement account. If you hold the S&P 500, on the other hand, it will be some time before SpaceX finds its way into your index. So, what's my personal read? Again, not financial advice. SpaceX is a very exciting company in the most exciting industry at a particularly transformative time. But the valuation seems to be pricing all of that in. Elon Musk has proven to be an absolutely brilliant entrepreneur and has made magic before. So I have no reason to doubt that he might do it again here. But at such a massive valuation, it feels like that again might be reasonably priced into the valuation. So while I absolutely want to be a part of this journey with SpaceX, I would be skeptical of putting in my entire position on day one. US markets and big tech companies in particular have seen a Starship style ascent into the stratosphere in recent years. And while I believe in the revolutionary potential of AI and space exploration, the coming wave of IPOs in the hype maxed AI market makes me cautious. I'd rather hold back at least some of my interest for when the dust settles. But I might take that first bite, one small step for my portfolio, just to be a part of this giant leap for mankind. Closing it out with the question we started on, is the space market real or just science fiction? Well, it's very much both. It's real. There's a genuine profitable business case for scaling up launches as evidenced by the thriving Starlink business today. The global space economy was already around $613 billion in 2024 and growing nearly 8% a year in the following year. And NASA's own administrator, Jared Isaacman, calls it a $1 trillion industry while also discussing the need for NASA to rely on commercial viability to fund space investments rather than only relying on taxpayer funds. This is the key to the space industry growing much faster. And Starship's payload capacity, previously the stuff of dreams, is a reality. The cadence of launches is increasing quickly, while the cost for launch drops accordingly. None of that is fiction. But a huge chunk of the $1.7 trillion isn't about the present. It's about the promise for the future and humanity's push to do more with space than we ever have before. The modern space race is on, with real landing date targets, and SpaceX is a central part of that. The conversation about establishing a permanent settlement in space has moved out of the fringe and into the boardrooms of global superpowers like the US and China. So, is this IPO the biggest opportunity or the biggest indication that we're living in a hype bubble? Here's where I land. SpaceX is an extraordinary company led by the most successful founder of our time, but on valuation, the valuation is also extraordinary, which means we're going to have to see him pull off some magic again to justify it. True believers will point to how Elon's incentives are aligned with investors and how he's done the impossible before, hitting wildly ambitious targets most everyone believed to be impossible. And maybe the skeptics will be right, but Tesla was once the most shorted company on the planet, and as the short sellers themselves will tell you, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay liquid. So maybe it's justified, or maybe the valuation hinges on a dream. But for many investors hoping to own a piece of SpaceX, many of whom invested in Elon before, the decision to invest is more than just a financial one. It's buying a piece of the dream to make life multiplanetary, to carry the light of consciousness out into the stars, and to be a part of something bigger than themselves. But what do you think? Does SpaceX stock take flight or blow up on the launch pad? Tell me in the comments, and if you've gotten something useful out of this, I'd love to keep making videos like this one for you. The best way you can support the channel is by sharing the video with someone else you think might find it useful or interesting. And you can also consider liking and subscribing below. I'll see you at the next launch, and until then, stay curious.